My name is Diana Thornton. I'm 34 years old. And the day I got the keys to my first house, my mother's voice went so cold, you would have thought I had stolen something from her. I was standing in my empty kitchen on Lennon Street, holding those keys, when my phone lit up with 11 missed calls from my parents. 11. I thought they were hurt, that I hadn't told them sooner. I thought my mom wanted to cry, happy tears, and my dad wanted to check the water heater. I was wrong about all of it. 3 weeks later, an 8-year-old told me the truth at a kitchen counter. And what my family did after that made losing my spare key look like a warm-up because my parents weren't angry about what I bought. They were angry about what my sister was supposed to do with it. Welcome back to Last Laugh Stories, where quiet people finally say the things families don't want to hear. If you've ever been the one everybody leans on, this story is going to feel familiar. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And be sure to subscribe, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. Let me back up, because you need to know who I was in my family before you can understand what happened. I'm a senior accountant at a firm in Dayton, Ohio, 12 years at the same office. 9 of those years I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat where every Tuesday smelled like other people's fabric softener. I made my coffee at home. I drove a car with a crank window. I put money away every single month quietly, the way some people pray. In my family, I was the one who handles things. I did my parents' taxes every spring. I did my Aunt Sharon's taxes. When my grandmother needed help with a Medicare form, they called me. When anyone got a letter with a government seal on it, that letter ended up on my kitchen table. My sister Rachel used to joke that I was the family's free accountant, free notary, and free therapist. And everyone would laugh, and I would laugh too, because that's what I did. I laughed and I handled it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the reliable one. In my family, reliable isn't a compliment, it's a job assignment. There's no raise, no vacation, and absolutely no quitting. You get hired at 12 years old, and you find out about the retirement policy the hard way. For most of my life, I thought that job was the same thing as being loved. I balanced everyone's books and told myself the numbers proved I belonged. Standing in that empty kitchen with 11 missed calls, I had no idea my job description was about to expand because reliable, it turns out, came with housing duties. I just hadn't read that part of the contract yet. Nobody had shown it to me. They'd only shown it to each other. Here's the layout of the pressure cooker my family was living in. My parents, Carol and Frank Thornton, own a 3-bedroom house on Warner Avenue about 15 minutes from my new place. My dad is 66, a retired machinist who barely talks unless something's broken. My mom is 63 and works part-time at the First Methodist Church office, which in our town is less a job and more a throne. 2 years ago, my sister Rachel's husband Mark lost his heating and cooling business. He'd worked for himself for 6 years, and then suppliers got expensive. 2 big clients stiffed him, and it all came down slowly and then very fast. 18 months ago, Rachel and Mark and their 3 kids moved into my parents' house. Rachel is 31. The kids are Ava, who's 8, Cody, who's 6, and June, who's 3. That's 7 people in a house built for 4. And I watched it wear on all of them. I never said a word against it. I bought the kids' school supplies in August. I paid for Ava's summer camp and told Rachel it was a gift card promotion, which is not a real thing, but she didn't check. I showed up with groceries and called it just passing by. I did what I always did. I handled the edges of it quietly so nobody had to ask. But that fall, my mother started asking me a strange question. She'd wait until we were alone, drying dishes. And she'd say it casually, like she was asking about the weather. "Have you looked at anything bigger, honey?" Bigger. I lived alone above a laundromat. I remember thinking it was a funny word to keep landing on. It wasn't funny. It was a measurement. I want to tell you about the babysitting box because everything that happened this year started there 22 years ago. When I was 12, I babysat for 2 families on our street. $5 an hour, which felt like a fortune. I kept the money in a shoebox in my closet under a sweater, and I was saving for a blue 10 speed bike from the hardware store window. I counted that money the way other kids read comic books. One Saturday in March, the water heater on Warner Avenue died the same week. My dad's hours got cut. I came home from a school on Monday and the shoebox was light. Nobody had asked me. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table, put her hand over mine, and explained that families pull together and that she knew I understood. Then she said the sentence that built the next 22 years of my life. She turned to my dad and my aunt, and she said, "Diana understands. Diana always understands." And everyone smiled at me. I remember exactly how that smile felt to receive. It felt like being chosen. It felt like a trophy with my name engraved on it. So I smiled back and I said, the water heater was more important. And I never got the bike. And I learned the deal my family was offering. Understanding was the price of admission. Handling things was how I paid my dues. I spent the next 22 years being the girl who understands. I understood at 16, at 25, at 30. I understood until understanding was the only thing anyone thought I was for. The house on Lennon Street was the first thing in my life I ever refused to hand over, and my family treated that refusal like a crime. I bought my house in secret, and I want to be honest about why. 3 years ago, I bought a car, a sensible used sedan, the most boring purchase in America. I made the mistake of mentioning it at Sunday dinner before I signed. My family turned it into a 2 committee. My dad had opinions about transmissions. Aunt Sharon knew a guy. My mother wanted me to wait until spring for reasons that were never explained and never needed to be. By the end, I was so worn down, I nearly bought the car my mother liked in a color I hated. So, when I started house hunting last winter, I told no one. And the longer I looked, the stranger my mother's hints got. She kept mentioning one specific listing, a 4-bedroom on Maple Street, good school district, she'd say. A house like that holds its value, room to grow. I hadn't told her I was looking. I remember a cold little feeling under my ribs every time Maple Street came up. Like hearing your own name in a conversation you're not part of. I didn't have a word for it yet. I just knew I wanted a door that locked and a deed with one name on it. In February, I found the cottage on Lennon Street, 2 bedrooms, a porch with a crooked step, a blue ceramic dish the old owners left by the toaster, $285,000. I put down $57,000, 20% 12 years of my life in one wire transfer. My realtor asked if my family wanted a walkthrough before closing. I said, my family walks through things by voting on them. 40 minutes of paperwork to buy a house. It would take my family 4 months to make me regret the pen. The closing day was the first Friday in the March. I signed. I shook hands. I drove to Lennon Street and stood in my own kitchen with my own keys. And I did something I'd been imagining for months. I texted a photo of the keys to the family group chat with one line. Surprise! I bought a house. Then I set the phone on the counter and just breathed. When I picked it up again, 11 missed calls. My parents' landline. My mother's cell. My mother's cell. My mother's cell. No text saying congratulations. Nothing from Rachel at all. I called back standing in the empty kitchen, and my mother answered before the first ring finished. There was a silence long enough that I said hello twice. Then my mother said, "You did this without consulting us. Not where is it, not how much. Not are you happy, sweetheart. Consulting. Like I'd sold a company out from under its board." I laughed honestly because I thought she had to be halfway joking. "Mom, I'm 34. It's a 2-bedroom cottage, not a merger." My dad was on speaker. I could hear him breathing and not saying anything, which is my dad's native language. My mother's voice didn't get louder. It got lower and very calm, which anyone in my family can tell you is the actual danger sign. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. And then she hung up on me. I stood there holding the phone in a house that still smelled like other people's paint. Here's what I knew about my mother's anger after 34 years of studying it. It had shapes. Hurt had one shape. Worry had another. This was neither. This was the shape of something breaking that I couldn't see. A plan, as it turned out. Their plan. By Sunday, the phone tree had bloomed. If you're from a small church town, you know exactly what I mean. Aunt Sharon texted first. Call your mother. She is devastated. Devastated about a cottage. Then my mother's cousin called to say that family was the only thing we take with us, which was rich considering she once sued her own brother over a lawnmower. Then 2 ladies from First Methodist sent me nearly identical messages about how blessed I was and how blessings were meant to be shared. I want you to notice something I noticed later. Lying awake, nearly identical. The same phrases kept arriving from different mouths. Shared blessings. Family sticks together. Your poor mother. When 5 people call you selfish in the same words, somebody wrote the words. At the time, I just felt like I was going crazy. I'd bought a house with my own money in my own town, 15 minutes from my parents, and my family was reacting like I'd fled the country under a fake name. But the message that kept me up wasn't from an aunt. It was from my sister. Rachel had said nothing for 2 days. No congratulations, no exclamation points, none of her usual 12 emojis. Then Sunday night, my phone buzzed once. So that's it then. That's all she wrote. I read it maybe 30 times. So that's it then. It was the voice of someone at the end of something, a person watching a door close. But I hadn't closed a door. I'd opened my first one. I typed, "What does that mean?" and watched the dots appear and disappear, like someone pacing behind glass. No answer came. Everyone in my family seemed to be grieving the same loss at the same funeral. And I was the only one who hadn't seen the body. 3 weeks after closing, my mother summoned me to Sunday dinner on Warner Avenue. Summoned is the right word. The text read like a court date. I went because 22 years of training doesn't dissolve in 2 weeks. Dinner was pot roast and politeness so thick you could spread it. My dad talked about the weather twice. Rachel wouldn't hold my eyes. She kept cutting June's food into smaller and smaller pieces, long after June stopped eating. Mark kept saying the roast was great, which was more conversation than he usually managed around my parents. Every conversation kept dying in the middle, like the whole table was waiting for a cue nobody would give. Then over dessert, my mother set down her fork and said to no one in particular, "The 4-bedroom on Maple was still available, you know. Good school district." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not surprised, quiet. Caught quiet. I looked up. "How do you know what was available, Mom?" She smoothed the tablecloth. "People mention things. Here's what you need to understand." I had never once told my mother I was house hunting. Not the Maple listing, not any listing. Yet she knew that house was still available. Still, as in someone had been tracking it. Rachel stared into her coffee like it owed her money. My dad got very busy with a napkin. And then Ava, my 8-year-old niece, looked up from her ice cream with the pure administrative confidence of a 3rd grader and asked, "Aunt Di, is your new house the one where Rachel said, Ava?" Just her name, fast and sharp as a mouse trap. Ava stopped. The table restarted loudly all at once about nothing. And I sat there with my spoon in the air, finally certain of one thing. Everyone in that room knew something I didn't. I got my answer the same night from the only honest person in my family. After dinner, I was rinsing plates and Ava climbed onto the counter stool next to me with her bowl of melting ice cream, swinging her feet. She's a planner, Ava. She keeps lists. And she said conversationally, "The way you discuss a field trip," Mom said. "When you got the new house, me and Cody get the big room, and June sleeps with Mom and Dad till she's 5. My hands went still in the water. I kept my voice very light. "The new house. Your house," Ava said patiently because grown-ups are slow. "When you got the big one. Mom and Grandma talk about it all the time. Since before Christmas. Since before Christmas. It was the end of March. I dried my hands, walked into the living room. And I asked the question straight out in front of everyone, because I'd learned that privacy was where my family did its best work. Were Rachel and Mark planning to move into my house? Nobody said, "What?" Nobody looked confused. That's how I knew. Rachel closed her eyes. Mark studied the carpet like there'd be a test. My dad looked at my mother and my mother. My mother looked relieved. Honest to God, relieved like a woman finally allowed to set down a heavy bag. You were never supposed to hear it from Iva, she said. And then it all came out, smooth as a rehearsed speech, which it was the plan. I buy the 4-bedroom on Maple, the house she'd been steering me toward for months. Rachel, Mark, and the kids move in with me. A few years. That's all. Family helping family. Everyone had discussed it. Everyone had agreed. Everyone but me. I stood in my parents' living room and heard my own future described in the past tense. And when I finally asked, "Why would you plan my life without asking me?" my mother looked genuinely puzzled. "What's yours is the family's, Diana. That's what family means," I said no in my parents' living room. And I want to tell you exactly how, because I'd rehearsed versions of that word my whole life and never once spent one. I didn't yell. I didn't list 22 years of grievances. I said, "No, I'm sorry this plan existed without me in it," but no, for a second, nobody moved. I don't think anyone in that room had ever heard from me without a cushion around it. Then my mother recovered the way a chess player recovers by moving the next piece. "Fine," she said. "Then sell it. The Maple house is still on the market. Buy it and we'll help you look this time. We'll help you look this time." That sentence told me everything about how they saw the last 12 years of my life. My cottage wasn't my home. It was a clerical error. The wrong box checked on a form. And the family was generously offering to help me fix my mistake. I said, "My house is not a mistake. It's not for sale and it's not available." Rachel finally spoke from the couch. "Quiet. You have 2 bedrooms. Di, we have 3 kids." As if the math were the argument. As if the only problem with taking my house was that it might be too small. Nobody in that room ever asked the question. I kept waiting for the simple one. The human one. "Do you want to live with 5 other people, Diana?" Nobody asked because my wanting had never been a line item in the family budget. I picked up my coat and my keys and I left. And driving back to Lennon Street, I actually felt lighter because I thought I'd ended something. I thought no was the end of a sentence. In my family, it was the start of a campaign. The campaign began politely. The way everything in my family begins. That first week of April, Aunt Sharon appeared on my porch with a chicken casserole and a speech. She toured my cottage, saying cozy the way some people say condemned. And then she sat at my kitchen table and explained that family takes care of family. That my grandmother's generation shared everything. That she just knew I'd do the right thing once the shock wore off. The shock. Mine, apparently. The shock of behaving selfishly. She was the first of many. Over 3 weeks, I received 2 more casseroles, 1 lasagna, a bundt cake, and a rotation of visitors who all seemed to be working from the same script. A church friend of my mother's texted that she was praying for me to soften my heart. My mother's cousin left a voicemail about how houses are temporary, but family is eternal, which, as an accountant, I can tell you is exactly backwards. The house has a 30-year mortgage, and the family was currently treating me like a foreclosure. Here's the detail that got under my skin. Not one of them asked me a single question about my life. Not what the house was like, not whether I was happy, not why a woman who'd saved for 12 years might want a door of her own. Every conversation started at my obligation and ended at my selfishness, like my actual self was a hallway they walked through to get between those 2 rooms. I stayed polite. I froze the casseroles. I said, "I hear you so many times it stopped sounding like words." But at night, I kept turning over the same cold. The aunts, the cousins, the church ladies. They all used the same phrases in the same order. Somebody had written the script, and I knew her handwriting. In the middle of all that, I almost surrendered. And I want to be honest about it, because this part matters. Mid-April, I drove to Warner Avenue to drop off a raincoat June had left in my car. I let myself in through the kitchen like always, and I stood there for a minute, unnoticed, just looking. There was an air mattress leaning against the living room wall, folded like a bad secret. Cody's sneakers were lined up on the stairs, because there was no floor left in the boys' room. Through the doorway, I could see June's crib mattress, wedged beside my parents' bed. Rachel was at the stove, stirring something, and my sister is 31 years old. But from the side in that light, she looked 50. My mother stood at the sink in her back. When did my mother's back start curving like that? Nobody was performing for me. Nobody knew I was there. It was just their actual life. 7 people breathing the same tired air. And it was hard. I'm not made of stone. I stood in the kitchen I grew up in and felt the old machinery start up in my chest, the gears of the girl who understands. I actually took out my phone. I had the realtor's number on the screen. One call: was the Maple House still available? How fast could I sell? My thumb hovered, and then a different part of my brain, the accountant, thank God for her, asked one quiet question. Wet, why is my house the only option anyone has ever discussed? 7 people, a whole town, a whole economy of choices, rentals, assistants, Mark's brother in Columbus, and the family had run every road through me. I put the phone away, but my thumb remembered. So, I did what I do. I built a plan. If the problem was really housing, then housing has solutions. And I am very good at solutions. I spent a full weekend on it. I found 6 rental listings inside Ava's school district. 3 of them, 3 bedrooms. I built Rachel and Mark a budget spreadsheet, real numbers, what they'd need monthly, where the gaps were. I looked up a nonprofit that helps families restart after a business failure. And I offered money, not vague money, specific money, application fees on every apartment they applied for, plus real help with the deposit. I printed all of it, put it in a folder, and brought it to Rachel at my parents' house on a Tuesday evening, genuinely believing, God help me, that I was bringing good news. Rachel opened the folder, and I watched her face change as she turned the pages, and it was not relief. She looked at my printouts like they were a summons. A spreadsheet, she said. You made us a spreadsheet. It's a plan, Ra. It's 6 actual apartments. We don't need a spreadsheet, die. Her voice cracked in the middle. We need family. And there it was. The whole war in one short sentence. Though I wouldn't fully understand it for another 2 months, I was offering to solve the problem. But the problem was not the ask. I was the ask. My house, my roof. Me absorbed back into the household of us. That was the plan. And a stack of apartment listings was me refusing the plan while wearing a helpful costume. Mark came in halfway through, looked at the folder, looked at me, and walked back out without a word. At the time, I read it as contempt. I was wrong about that, and it's one of the few things in this story I'm glad I was wrong about. The Saturday after the spreadsheet, my dad showed up alone at the cottage. No call. I looked out, and there was Frank Thornton's gray truck at the curb, and my dad on my porch with his toolbox, already frowning at the crooked step like it had said something about my mother. This step's going to drop somebody, he said. That was the whole greeting. He didn't mention the house, that should have been Maple or Rachel or the war. He just fixed the step, pulled the board, cut a new one, set each nail with 2 clean strikes, while I sat on the porch rail with coffee, and handed him things before he asked, which is the entire language the 2 of us have fluently. When he was done, he packed the toolbox, squared it in his hand, and stood there a second looking at the yard. Then my dad, a man who volunteers roughly nothing, said, Your mother's not wrong about everything, kiddo. She's just carrying more than she shows. I said, Carrying what? Dad, and I watched him almost say it. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. His mouth opened, his jaw shifted. The truth got as far as his teeth. Then he tapped the new step once with his boot, said, Keep paint on that, and drove home. I stood on my solid level, honest porch step, and understood exactly one thing. There was a number somewhere in my parents' life that I had not been given. And my mother was doing all of this math around it in the dark. I defined the number in June in a cardboard box. Hold on. If you're listening to this and you've ever watched your father apologize for your mother with a toolbox, instead of words, tell me about it in the comments because I rate everyone. And if you're wondering what my parents were actually hiding under all that fury, stay with me and subscribe because I didn't see it coming either, and I do this for a living. In early May, I did something my therapist would have charged extra to hear about. I threw a housewarming and invited the entire family. Olive branch, white flag, call it what you want. I cleaned for 2 days. I made my grandmother's lemon bars from the recipe card in her own handwriting, and they came, all of them. My parents, Rachel and Mark, and the kids, Aunt Sharon. 2 church ladies doing reconnaissance for 3 hours. It almost worked. Ava claimed the window seat in my office and read a whole chapter out loud to June. My dad walked the basement with a flashlight and pronounced my furnace better than it deserves to be, which from Frank Thornton is a love a sonnet. My mother was careful and correct, complimenting my curtains the way you'd compliment a rival's haircut. And here's the detail that matters, the one I need you to hold on to. By my toaster sits a small blue ceramic dish that the previous owners left behind. I liked it, so I kept it. And that's where I kept my spare key. It sat there all afternoon in plain sight. People in and out of my kitchen for 3 hours, refilling drinks, cutting lemon bars, admiring the window over the sink. The party ended around 6. Hugs at the door, leftovers in foil, tail lights down Linen Street. I washed dishes, dried them, put the kettle on, and then I stopped. The blue dish was empty. I stood there with the dish towel over my shoulder and told myself it fell. It got moved. A kid was playing with it. I searched the counter, the drawer, the floor, the trash bag by the back door. Coat pockets I hadn't worn since March. It was 10:00 before I let myself sit down and think the actual thought. Nobody broke into my house that night. Somebody had just made sure they'd never have to. I want to be very careful about what I say next, because I never found out for certain whose pocket my key left in. And I've decided I don't want to know. Here's what I did instead of accusing anyone. Monday morning, I called a locksmith. By Wednesday, both doors had new locks and the back door had a deadbolt that could stop a grudge. I didn't announce it. I didn't text the family group chat. Something pointed. I just quietly made my house mine again, because a lock is not an argument. It's a fact and ideal in facts. The locksmith was a cheerful guy who talked about his fantasy league the whole time. And when he left, he said what they always say. You'd be surprised who has keys to people's houses. I said I was past surprised. That night was the low point of the whole spring for me. And I'll tell you why. Because it wasn't fear. I sat on my kitchen floor, actually on the floor, back against the cabinets like a teenager, holding the new keys on their little paper tag. And I cried for the first time since closing day. It had nothing to do with burglars. It was the direction the lock was pointing. 34 years old, and I was installing hardware against my own family. Every clean tooth on those keys said the same thing. You were right not to trust them. And being right felt like swallowing a stone. I put the spare in a place I will not be sharing on the internet. The blue dish stayed on the counter, empty. I could have put it away, but I left it there on purpose. The way you leave a scar visible, some part of me already knew that key was going to come back into this story. I just didn't know it would arrive holding a moving truck. Now, I have to tell you about the box, because this is where the story stops being about a house. Every year since I got my license, accountant's license, not driver's, I have done my parents' taxes. Every February, my mother hands me a shoebox of receipts like a queen granting a charter, except this year. This year, we were at war, so in February, my mother informed me through my father that they would manage. April came and went. They filed an extension, which I knew because my dad muttered it at the housewarming like a man reporting a crop failure. Then one evening in the middle of June, Frank Thornton's gray truck pulled up to my cottage again, and my dad carried a cardboard box up my repaired step and set it on the kitchen table. Your mother can't face the box, he said. Don't tell her I brought it. He didn't stay. I made tea and started sorting, and honestly, it was soothing. Receipts, pension statements, the familiar shape of my parents' modest, careful life. I had a system going, little stacks across the table. And then I picked up a form and the evening went quiet. It was a 1098. That's the form a lender sends showing mortgage interest you paid. except my parents paid off Warner Avenue 10 years ago. I was at the barbecue. There was a cake shaped like a house. I read it again. A home equity line of credit secured against Warner Avenue opened a little over 2 years ago. Balance $85,000. I sat there with the form in my hand while my tea went cold, doing the one piece of math I'd never thought to do. My parents' house, the one thing they owned free and clear, wasn't free and clear anymore. And the date on that loan lined up with something with someone. I called my dad the next morning and said 6000. My porch, just him. He came. He sat on the top step, the one he'd fixed with his forearms on his knees, and I put the 1098 down next to him, and he looked at it the way you look at weather coming in. Then he told me everything in that flat machinist voice, sanding each sentence smooth before handing it over. 2 years ago, Mark's business was dying. Not dead, dying. That awful stage where money can still theoretically save it. Rachel came to Warner Avenue crying about losing their house. And my mother, who watched her own family lose a house when she was a girl, decided that would not happen to her daughter. So, my parents took out an $85,000 line of credit against a paid-off house. And they poured it into Mark's company. And the company died anyway and took Rachel's a house with it. Now, the payment on that loan came out of a machinist's pension and Social Security every single month, and it was winning. The plan, my dad said, was the way out. You in a bigger place with Rachel's crew, a selling Warner, paying off the loan, getting one of those condos by the church. He rubbed his thumb along the stepboard. It all worked, Di. On paper, it all worked. Every road ran through me, and now I finally knew why. I was the only bridge still standing. I asked him the only question left. Why didn't anybody just ask me? My dad was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Your mother gave up nursing school to raise her brothers. Nobody asked her either. She doesn't know another way. He stood up, tapped the step with his boot, and drove home to his mortgaged house. My mother found out I knew within a week because Warner Avenue has thin walls and my parents have been married 40 years. She didn't call. She showed up at my office, of all places, on a Thursday at lunch and asked the receptionist for me, like she was picking up a prescription. We sat in the little conference room with the bad coffee. And I watched my mother, my proud, upright church office mother, decide to stop fighting me with aunts and casseroles and try the one weapon she'd never used on me. The truth, aimed carefully. So now you know, she said. I said I did. Her chin came up. Then you know you could fix all of this, Diana. She laid it out, the whole clean machine of it. Sell the cottage, buy the maple house, take in the Doyles. They sell Warner Avenue, clear the loan. Everyone lands soft, one signature, she said, and her voice did something I'd never heard it do in a fight. It shook. One yes from you and this whole nightmare is over for everybody. For everybody. I looked at my mother across that laminate table, and for the first time in this entire war, she looked old to me. 63 years of holding other people's ceilings up with her spine, and the spine was tired. Some part of me had waited my whole life to be this necessary. That's the ugly little truth of the reliable one. The wound wants the job. My hands actually itched for a pen. I said quiet as I could. Mom, I can't be the plan. I can help, but I can't be the plan. She gathered her purse like a verdict and left. That night, my phone buzzed. The family group chat. A screenshot from Rachel. A U-Haul reservation for Saturday. I still don't know if that screenshot was a mistake or a warning. Rachel says mistake. Ava, who is honest, says her mom cried while typing it, so make of that what you will. Either way, Saturday came and I did something that surprised even me. I went to work. Extension season at an accounting firm. Doesn't take weekends off. And I sat at my desk running other people's numbers. Because some stubborn, hopeful animal in my chest refused to believe my family would actually do it. At 11:40, my phone rang. Mrs. Alvarez, my next-door neighbor, 71 years old, retired school teacher. Sharpest eyes on Linen Street. Deanna, honey, she said, in the exact voice you'd use for there's smoke coming from your kitchen. There is a moving truck in your driveway. I asked her to describe what she saw, and she did, like the professional witness she was born to be. A U-Haul backed in. A man carrying boxes onto my porch. Mark, children on my lawn, and a woman at my front door. Trying a key that would not turn. Trying it again. Stepping back to look at the door like the door had betrayed her. My sister standing on my welcome mat, with the key from the blue ceramic dish. Discovering 6 weeks too late that the locks on my house no longer matched the plan for my house. "Should I call someone?" Mrs. Alvarez asked, and I said, "You just did. I'm on my way." The drive from my office to Linen Street takes about 20 minutes. And I want to tell you what those 20 minutes felt like, because it wasn't what I expected. No shaking hands, no racing heart. I drove the speed limit the whole way, calmer than I'd been in 4 months. The calmest I've ever been was the day I should have been screaming, because between exits, somewhere on Route 4, the last soft, hopeful thing in me finished dying. And what's left when that dies is very, very steady. Here is the scene I pulled up to, and the scene half my neighborhood pulled back curtains to watch. A U-Haul in my driveway with its ramp down. A dozen boxes stacked on my porch. June asleep in her car seat on the lawn. Cody driving a toy truck through my flower bed. Ava sitting on the steps hugging her backpack. And my mother's sedan parked across the street because Rachel had called for backup when the key failed. I got out. Rachel started talking before my car door shut. It was temporary. They had meant to call. Everything with the truck was half price on weekends. Words in the order panic delivers them. Mark, to his credit, had stopped moving boxes and just stood there with his empty hands. A man visibly wishing to be anywhere else on earth. I walked up my own front path and said, not loud, "You need to load those boxes back on the truck." And my mother came across the street, saying we would all discuss it inside and move toward my porch like the matter was settled. And that's when it happened. The sentence left me before I planned it. "You need to leave my property." My property to my own mother in front of my niece. The word landed on that lawn like a dropped dish and everything stopped. Even Cody's truck noises stopped. My mother went white, then very still. And she pulled herself up and gave me in front of the children and the boxes and Mrs. Alvarez's unapologetic window one more recital of the family creed. "What's yours is the family's, Diana. That's what family means." I stood on the step my father fixed and heard myself answer. "Then I guess I'm not family today." They loaded the boxes. It took 40 minutes and I watched all 40. Arms folded, dying inside and refusing to look like it. The U-Haul pulled away at 4:15. By 6:00, I was a monster in 4 group chats I wasn't in. The silence afterward had a temperature. Weeks of it. No Sunday dinner summons, which I expected, but also no photos of the kids in the family chat. Someone had quietly removed me. Cody's birthday came and went in early August. I heard about the party from a bakery cashier who assumed I'd been there. That one I carried around for days like a splinter I couldn't dig out. My mother told her circle I'd chosen a house over her grandchildren, and the phrasing traveled the way her phrasings do. And then on a Tuesday night, my phone rang and the screen said, "Nana Ruth, my grandmother is 85 and does not call people. She summons them through intermediaries like royalty." I answered, expecting the final boss of the guilt campaign. Instead, my grandmother said, "I hear you told Carol no." I braced and she said, "Huh." A long interested huh, like a woman tasting something new. And then she told me a story I'd never heard in my life. When my mother was 19, she got into nursing school. There was an acceptance letter. It sat on the kitchen table on Nana's farm for 3 days, propped against the salt shaker. That same week, my great-grandfather lost his job at the mill. And there were 3 boys still at home to feed, and Carol was the oldest. And the letter disappeared off the table, and nobody ever spoke of it again. "Your mother cried in my kitchen one night," Nana said, and then she never mentioned it again. I let her not mention it. That was my mistake, child. Not hers. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I asked what I should do, and my grandmother declined to answer because she's Nana. "Come to my birthday," she said. "Whatever you decide, decide it standing up. I need to show you the worst hour of this whole story. And it doesn't have any yelling in it. It's just me, my kitchen table, and a laptop at 2 in the morning. 11 days before my grandmother's birthday, I opened a spreadsheet. Of course I did. And across the top, I typed a question I'd never let myself write down. What would it cost to buy them back? Column A, the money. Paying off my parents' loan meant my 85,000. I had what was left of my savings after the down payment. It wasn't enough. Not close. Getting there meant borrowing against my retirement account. 6 years of repayments, my safety net gone at 34 with a brand new mortgage on my back. I typed it all in anyway. My cursor sat there blinking. Then I added column B and I labeled it what it buys. And that's where the night got honest. Because I know this family ledger. I've been keeping it since I was 12. Empty the shoebox, get the warm smile. The smile lasts until the next water heater. Pay off their loan, and I wouldn't be buying my family back. I'd be renewing my lease with them. Same terms, bigger payment. In the last cell of column B, at 20:40 in the morning, I typed a single word, rent. I looked at that word until my eyes burned. Then I closed the laptop without saving, which for me is practically arson, and went to bed. Let me stop and ask you something honestly, friend to friend. Have you ever sat at a kitchen table in the middle of the night, doing the math on buying back your own family? If that's you, put it in the comments. Not for me. For the next woman scrolling at 2 a.m., who thinks she's the selfish one. She isn't, and neither were you. And stay with me here, because what I decided to bring to my grandmother's birthday, instead of that check, that's the part of this story I'm actually proud of. Subscribe if you want the ending. It's close now and it's worth. The answer, when it finally came, didn't come from the spreadsheet. It came from a door frame. That weekend, I was clearing out the hall closet, moving in work, the kind that takes months. And when I pulled up the old shelf liner, I uncovered something on the closet door frame. The previous owners had painted around instead of painting over. Pencil marks, little horizontal dashes climbing the frame, each one dated, each one labeled in a parent's handwriting. Emmy, age 6, Emmy, age 8, a second column, lower. Ben, age 4. 20 years of some other family's Tuesdays, climbing a door frame in a house that now belonged to me. I sat down on the closet floor and looked at those marks for a long time. This is what a house is, I thought. Not square footage, not an asset with bedrooms to be assigned by committee before the owner is consulted. A house is the wall you measure your years against. Nobody had ever asked me what I was measuring mine against. And sitting there, I finally understood what I actually wanted to say to my family. And it wasn't just no. No was true. But it was only half of me. The other half, the accountant, the aunt who buys school supplies, the woman who understands. She needed a voice, too. Or I'd walk out of that birthday party having amputated something instead of having grown it. What I wanted to say was, not like this. Ask me and watch what I'll do. Take me hostage and watch the door. So, I got up off the closet floor and I got a folder, a good one, the leather kind, and I started building what I was going to put on my grandmother's table. 3 things. It took me 9 days, 2 phone calls I was scared to make, and 1 checkbook. The invitation to Nana Ruth's 85th birthday dinner arrived by mail because my grandmother believes group texts are for hostage negotiations. Cream card stock. Her spidery cursive dinner at her house, the last Saturday of August, and an hour after the mail came, only I got one, I later confirmed, a follow-up text from my mother. The first direct words she'd sent me since the lawn. Come ready to be part of this family again. I read that sentence maybe 50 times. And I want to give my mother credit because it's a masterpiece. 8 decades of family, diplomacy compressed into 1 line that offers you everything and tells you the price without naming it. Come ready to surrender. It meant come ready to sign. The door is open and the tall is everything you said no to a year ago. Honestly, 4 months ago, that sentence would have worked on me. That's the thing about being the girl who understands. You can be managed with almost nothing. A cold text, a warm smile, the promise that the temperature might change. But I'd spent the summer learning the difference between being loved and being leased. So I ironed my green dress. I confirmed with Nana by mail like a civilized person. And the night before the party, I sat at my kitchen table and went through the folder one last time. Every page, every number, the check paper clipped where I'd see it first. I slept better than I had any right to. My mother had planned a birthday dinner, and what she'd actually built was a stage with my seat marked and the audience preloaded. Fine. I'd learned something about stages that summer, watching her work. The calmest person in the room owns it, and nobody in my family had ever seen me be exactly as calm as I was planning to be. My grandmother's dining room holds a table long enough to seat 20 under a lace cloth that has survived 4 wars in this family. That Saturday it was full. My parents, the Doyles, Aunt Sharon and her husband, 2 great-aunts, the church ladies, cousins I see at funerals, place cards which Nana never uses, my mother's handwriting on everyone. My seat was between Aunt Sharon and the diffest of the great aunts. Surrounded in the polite way, I passed the rolls. I complimented the ham like everyone else. And I watched my mother run the table the way a conductor runs an orchestra, and I kept the folder in my bag under my chair and I waited. We sang. Nana blew out her candles with June on her lap, and it was, I'll say it, almost lovely. Then while the coffee was being poured, my mother stood up and touched her glass with a spoon. She thanked everyone for coming. She said how much family meant tonight of all nights. And then she turned to me, warm as a heat lamp, and said, "And we're so glad Diana is here, because we're hoping tonight she'll finally give this family her answer. Rachel and the children need a home, sweetheart. So, is it going to be your sister, or is it going to be that house?" Silence with China in it. 20 faces turned to me like a jury that had carpooled. Ava stopped mid-bite and looked at her mother, then at me. Somebody's spoon clinked, embarrassed. My mother stayed standing, gracious and terrible, holding the room she'd built and offering me in front of all of it her famous 2 doors. Surrender or exile. I put my napkin on the table and stood up because Nana Ruth had told me to decide it standing. "Okay," I said, "let's answer it properly." I didn't raise my voice. If anything, I lowered it. I gave the room accountant voice, year-end review voice, the tone I use for clients whose numbers have stopped agreeing with their stories. Before I answer, I said, I want to make sure we're all answering the same question. So, let me say the whole thing out loud one time. And I did. The plan, discussed since before Christmas at tables, I wasn't invited to for, where my sister's family would live in a house I hadn't bought yet. A plan everyone in this room had heard before I had. The 4-bedroom on Maple Street, I was steered toward for months like a cow, steered toward a chute. My spare key which left my kitchen in somebody's pocket in May. The moving truck that met my new locks in July. And the loan. I said it plainly without cruelty because Frank Thornton's daughter owed him that much. 2 years ago, Mom and Dad borrowed $85,000 against Warner Avenue to try to save Mark's business. It didn't work. The payment is eating their retirement alive. That's the engine under all of this. That's why it had to be me. The room did not gasp. Look around a family table when the truth finally sits down at it. Nobody's shocked. The aunts studied their coffee. Mark stared at his hands. My mother's chin came up and her voice, for the first time in my 34 years of studying it, went loud, cracked loud. "You have no right." And I said gently, "Mom, Rachel needs 4 walls. What you've been asking all year is for me to be the walls." I let it sit. Then I reached under my chair and lifted the folder onto the lace tablecloth. But I didn't come here to say no. I came to show you what yes looks like when somebody actually asks me. I opened the folder and took out 3 things. And I walked them down the table like I was dealing the last hand of the night. The first was a check. "Rachel Mark, there's a 3-bedroom apartment on Delmare Court, 11 minutes from AA's school. I toured it Tuesday. The manager is holding it until the 1st. I set the check in front of my sister. That's first and last month. It's made out to the property company. Not to you, not to Mom, to the landlord. It's a home rage. It has your names on the lease and nobody's name on the favor." Rachel looked at the check and her mouth folded in on itself, and Mark put his hand flat on the table like a man steadying a boat. The second thing was a stack of paper in a binder clip. I said it in front of my father. "Dad, that's a restructure package for the loan, a longer term, a lower monthly payment, numbers that fit a pension. I ran it 4 ways. The math holds. You keep Warner Avenue. You don't sell anything. I'll prepare the whole application and sit with you at the bank. No charge, obviously. I'm your daughter. I'm also the best accountant, you know." My father put 2 fingers on that binder clip like it was a bird that might startle. And the third thing I took out was a single blank sheet of paper. And that one I carried the length of the table and set down in front of my mother. She stared at it. "What is this?" "That's the page," I said, "where somebody for once asks me what I want. It's been blank for 22 years, Mom. I keep waiting." Her hands were shaking. The room was so still I could hear the kitchen clock. "One condition covers all of it," I said. "My house is not on this table. It never will be." And my mother, because she is who her life made her, stood up and played the last card in the deck. "If you walk out that door, Diana, don't you dare. Love you have to keep paying for isn't love, Mom." I picked up my coat off the chair. "It's rent. I've paid 22 years of it. I'm done renting." And into that silence, my grandmother's voice, old and dry as the lace. "Let her go, Carol. You of all people know what it costs to stay." I kissed Nana on the head on my way out. "Happy birthday." I walked through the front door, not knowing, truly not knowing, whether anything I'd left on that table would still be there in the morning, or whether I'd just traded my whole family for a door frame with someone else's pencil marks on it. The chimes on Nana's door rang behind me, and nobody followed, and I stood on the dark porch and let both of those facts be true at once. I cried on the drive home, and I want to be precise about why, because it wasn't regret. Somewhere on Route 4, between my grandmother's porch light and mine, I finally saw the shape of the whole thing. The shoebox, the smile, the 22 years. I had spent my life confusing being needed with being loved, and you can run a long way on that fuel. Ask my mother, who ran 44 years on it, all the way from a farm kitchen where an envelope disappeared off the table. She and I had been paying on the same debt our whole lives. She just never got to see the loan documents. Tonight, I'd walked out of the bank. I pulled on to Lennon Street around 10:00. My porch light was on. I'd left it on for myself, which felt suddenly like the whole point of everything. I sat in the driveway a minute, looking at the little house I'd been called selfish all summer for loving. 2 bedrooms, a crooked step my father made straight, a blue dish with nothing in it. And it occurred to me, turning the new key in my new lock, that this was the first night of my life when nobody on earth knew where I was but me. No chart, no committee, no assignment. It felt like grief, and it felt like mine. And I was still learning that those can be the same feeling. Then for 3 days, my family went completely silent. On the 4th day, my phone lit up with the name I expected least. Mark, my brother-in-law, a man who had rarely said an unnecessary sentence to me in 9 years, and whose pride had been sleeping on his in-laws fold-out for a year and a half. His text came through on a Wednesday morning, and I still have it. "Rachel dropped your check at the landlord's this morning. We got the apartment. The kids saw their rooms. Ava picked the one with the window seat. I'm sorry about your porch. Thank you." I sat at my desk and read it until the letters blurred. The proudest man in the family was the first one through the door I'd built. And that, friends, is how I learned the difference between people who need help and people who need you. The ones who actually need help will take it with both hands, even when it doesn't come wrapped in surrender. A week later, Rachel texted like nothing had ever happened, which is Rachel. Still on for school pickup Tuesdays. No capital letters, no apology, a bridge made of logistics. I took it. Bridges don't have to be pretty. My father came by that Sunday and fixed the gate latch, which wasn't broken, and drank 1 cup of coffee and sat at the door. The bank took the application. That was his whole speech. The restructure went through in October. The payment fits the pension now, and Warner Avenue isn't going anywhere. Nobody thanked me publicly. There was no group text. My mother's name stayed silent in my phone all fall. Almost all fall. It's November now, Saturday mornings. Once a month, there are pancakes at my house. Iva, Cody, June. Flour everywhere, and a new column of pencil marks starting up, my closet door frame right beside Emma's and Ben. Ava, age, measured and dated in my handwriting. She stands against that frame like she's being nanned. My birthday came 2 weeks ago. In the mail between a utility bill and a furnace flyer, one cream-colored card. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside a printed birthday verse, and under it no note, just Mom. I stood at the counter and held it a while. The aunts still tell their version at church. I've stopped auditing it. Some ledgers you close, not because they balance, but because you're done carrying them. And then last Sunday, Nana Ruth came for pancakes, summoned herself, arrived like weather, and inspected the whole house with her cane, and pronounced the window seat sensible, which is Nana for perfect. Before she left, I did the thing I'd been planning for a month. I took her hand and pressed a key into it, brand new, cut Thursday, shiny as a dime. Then I dropped it where she could watch me do it into the blue ceramic dish by the toaster where anyone in my kitchen can see it. Given is different from taken, Nana. My grandmother looked at the dish and then at me and nodded once like a judge. 22 years, child, she said. Some locks take longer. Here's what I know now. And I'll keep it short, because I've learned the short version is the true one. Family isn't the people who are allowed to take from you without asking. Family is the people who knock even when they have a key. That's my story. One house, one stolen key, one check with a landlord's name on it. If this reminded you that no is a complete sentence, even at your mother's table, take that as your sign. Share this video with someone who's still paying rent on love, and drop a comment with your story, because I read every single one. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next.